Welcome back. How'd you do? Does your persona have a specific role within the organization? Do they have a primary pain point? Do they have a gain point? And have you identified how your product or solution solves that pain point and achieves their gain?
Now let's look at some examples of companies that absolutely nailed their value propositions and why they nailed them. First up is what? Slack?
Slack's value proposition is Slack saves time by tearing down communication and system silos. It is a place where your team comes together to collaborate, important information can be found by the right people, and your tools pipe in information when and where you need it. That's a mouthful.
Sure it is. Okay, so let's break it down. Why is this a terrific example of a value prop?
Let's think about it from the persona's perspective. If I am the CEO of a company, and one of the pain points that I'm experiencing is that my teams are having a hard time communicating with each other. This is very true in software development, right? You end up in these little silos and you have to find an effective way to collaborate across teams. Slack, the very first line is tears down communication and system silos. It opens up communication. Pain point resolved.
So it's functional.
Absolutely. And it addresses the gain point, right? Slack very quickly adds in those cash and prizes. Your team comes together to collaborate. That's a great buzzword, right? That's what everybody is shooting for. Important information can be found by the right people. It's saying everything that I, as the buyer, need to hear in order to click that button.
Okay, terrific. Now let's take a look at another example. This time it's Airbnb. What does their value proposition look like and why do you think it's so good?
Yeah, Airbnb is my favorite value proposition example. Here is their value prop. Airbnb exists to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere, providing healthy travel that is local, authentic, diverse, inclusive, and sustainable.
What are they telling their customers and how does that resonate with their personas?
Think about the Airbnb persona. It is a person who loves to travel, but always likes to feel like a local. That is exactly what Airbnb says in the first line of its value prop. Create a world where anyone can belong anywhere.
Now let's look at an example that might seem like it's a value proposition, but it's really more of a tagline. And we're going to turn to Apple in this case.
The value proposition for Apple's new iPhone that covers 5G is high, speed. It's very clever, but is it really communicating a solution to a pain point for a specific persona?
You know, it's hard to say. This is why taglines and value propositions are so often confused, right? The example here with Apple, it is clever. It does sort of address a pain point because what they're trying to say here is high speed like tech, high HIGH speed, but also high speed like hello, because now their new phones are going to be supporting 5G technology. So it kind of answers a pain point, but it's really more form than function, in my opinion.
Exactly. And I think this is a great example of how your value proposition should inform your marketing. If a value proposition was to say, more specifically about the function, we provide a phone that does XYZ. When you filter that down throughout your marketing, you will end up with a tagline that is clever and still speaks to the pain point. But the value proposition does more than just address the pain point, right? It talks about a solution and then it talks about a gain point, what you get out of it. And then it makes a unique statement that your competitors simply can't claim. Almost all phone companies are going to talk about how fast their new phones are.
So what I hear you saying is that value propositions are inherent to your business.
Absolutely. They have to be true to you. Another great characteristic of a strong value proposition is that they address your customer's pain point. And this is where a lot of brands get stuck. They want to talk about themselves, but value propositions really need to be persona focused. So it's about the customer's pain point and what the customer gains by using your solution.
Okay, so let's recap what we've discussed so far today. We've talked about understanding what a value proposition is. We've talked about what a value proposition isn't. We've talked about characteristics that define a strong value proposition. And we've taken a look at some examples of good value propositions, as well as one example that might be perceived to be a value proposition when in fact it's really more of a tagline. Okay, so now we need to move to the next phase, which is crafting your value proposition. Your value proposition should answer 4 key points. Tell them what they are.
Is it concise? Is it clear? Is it specific to your core customer organization, your core persona? Is it unique? Is it something your competitors simply cannot say?
Each value proposition needs to tie to your persona. So each point should underscore a different pain point specific to that person, whether it's a line of business leader, a CIO, a CEO. Each one of them will have very, very different goals and objectives that align with their business.
A persona for every stakeholder and a core value proposition for every persona.
Exactly. And that's why you need to test your value proposition against these different personas, because the core value proposition isn't going to change dramatically. It's just going to be a nuanced change that's going to be very relevant and very meaningful to that person, whether it's a line of business leader, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a CTO. Each persona has a very different goal and objective that they're tasked with, they're focused on. I mean, if you bring it in-house to your own personal business, right, and you are responsible for a particular practice area, you're going to be less concerned with another aspect of the business. So think about it from that standpoint. We're all consumers. We all are buyers. We all transfer through the buying journey. And so it's helpful if you try to connect in that way to know what is meaningful to you isn't necessarily meaningful to someone else, and take it from there.
That's a great point, Lynette. You know, one of the things that I recommend is that folks take a brand that they love, that they trust, and work backwards. Why did you choose that brand? What is unique about that brand? What do you trust? Write a value proposition for a solution that you actually bought.
What would make you deviate from that brand? We all have very strong, passionate loyalty to certain brands. And in many cases, it's going to take a heck of a lot to make us move from that brand. And that is what you want to focus on as you're building your value proposition. How do you build that relationship, have that one-on-one connection with each buying decision maker?
A value proposition is an overarching promise. A core brand message is how you make that promise. It's the story that you tell to your customers. It's the vocabulary and the keywords you're going to use to effectively communicate your message and make sure it resonates with your potential customer. Let's look at a brand message like a story you tell your persona. You need to identify their challenge or their quest right away. That's their pain point. You then need to tie it to an emotional trigger, stressful, frustrating, something like that. Then you need to identify what they will get at the end of this quest. That's your gain point. You need to identify yourself as the guide who's going to give them the map that gets them to that happy ending. Think of it like this. Your customer is Luke Skywalker. You're Yoda. Finally, you need to tell them how they're going to feel at the end of the journey. If they were frustrated at the beginning, they need to feel relieved. If they were feeling insecure at the beginning of their journey, they need to feel confident.
That's awesome, Autumn. I love the whole Luke Yoda analogy. It's super cool. But I think what's really important here is brand authenticity, right? Just because you're relating a message out to your prospective customers isn't necessarily how they're perceiving it. Perception is reality. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter what you do, how you do it. It's how your customers perceive what you say and what you do. So it's really critical that you listen to your customers in every fashion that you can, whether it's phone calls, whether it's emails, whether it's at events where you hear what people are saying. It's important to listen to the ways that your customers are reacting to your brand.
I think that's a really great point, Lynette, and can't be understated. The last thing I would say about a core brand message is that it should have a call to action. It should have a driving statement that makes your customers want to get up and do something.
Terrific. Okay, so let's take another break and do a quick exercise on developing your core brand message. We'll see you in a few.